Okay, so we are now in Ezekiel 33. This is the section of Ezekiel that starts talking about future restoration and hope. We have one more little transition section here at the beginning of chapter 33. And then later in chapter 33, we're going to get the account of the messenger coming and telling the people in the city of Babylon that Jerusalem had fallen. And then from that point onward, we are going to be looking forward to the future. The judgment has happened, and it is time to start giving the people hope for the future. Because until the judgment finally happened, they didn't believe it was going to. So God couldn't start preparing them for the future until they had gotten to the point where they accepted that things really were as bad as God was telling them they were. Okay, so we've finished the section about the other nations. We had a whole section at the beginning about a bunch of different nations: Ammon, Moab, Edom, Philistia, kind of the usual suspects. We had a couple of chapters about Tyre and a couple of chapters about Egypt. Now we're turning our attention back to the Israelites, the Judah, the people of God. Ezekiel 33. The word of the Lord came to me. I don't know when this was. This section, this particular account doesn't have a date attached to it. I'm not sure if it should go with the previous section, which was about Egypt and its doom and its joining the ranks of the defeated enemies of God in the underworld. I don't know about that. This is just kind of a floating passage here that kind of bridges the gap between what we have been talking about and what we're going to talk about. The word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, or human, excuse me, speak to your countrymen and say to them, when I bring the sword against the land, and the people of the land choose one of their men, and make him their watchman, and he sees the sword coming against the land, and blows the trumpet to warn the people, which is what a watchman is supposed to do, then if anyone hears the trumpet, but does not take warning, and the sword comes and takes his life, his blood will be on his own head. Since he heard the sound of the trumpet, but did not take warning, his blood will be on his own head. He can't blame anyone but himself. If he had taken warning, he could have saved himself. But if the watchman sees the sword coming, and does not blow the trumpet to warn the people, and the sword comes and takes the life of one of them, that man will be taken away because of his sin. So the one who dies, the one who gets slain, is still going to die, and is still going to be slain for his sin. But I will hold the watchman accountable for his blood. No, it's someone else's responsibility. Someone else bears responsibility for what happened. Son of man, or human, I have made you a watchman for the house of Israel. So hear the word I speak, and give them warning from me. So if Ezekiel didn't do his job, if Ezekiel did not give the people the word that God gave him to give them, he would be responsible for what happens. So they would still be held accountable for their own sin. But his task was to warn these people with God's message, and if he doesn't do that, then he'll be responsible for not doing that. When I say to the wicked, O wicked man, you will surely die, and you do not speak out, you, Ezekiel, specifically you, Ezekiel, do not speak out to dissuade him from his ways, that wicked man will die for his sin. That doesn't excuse the wicked man from being wicked. But I will hold you accountable for his blood. But if you do warn the wicked man to turn from his ways, and he does not do so, he will still die for his sin, but you will have saved yourself. Son of man, say to the house of Israel, this is what you are saying. Our offenses and sins weigh us down, and we are wasting away because of them, or in them. How then can we live? So they have started to acknowledge that they have done wrong. As this is still before they hear about the final fall of the city. They must know by now the city is in dire straits because the Babylonian army's been there for a couple of years. So they must know that the city is in bad shape. But they, as of yet, apparently the word has not come to them that the city has fallen. But they are starting, previously they were saying it's not our fault. We're being punished for what the previous generations did. Now they seem to be accepting responsibility, but they might be going a little bit overboard and saying we just can't do anything. It's like we have no hope. We have nothing to believe in or nothing to look forward to. Say to them, and so when they say this, you say this to them. As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but rather that they turn from their ways and live. Turn from your evil ways. Why will you die, O house of Israel? God desires his creation to live. We saw a glimpse of that back in chapter, I think it was 16, where we saw that allegory, where God gave us an allegory of him finding Israel like a newborn baby that had been thrown out into the field to die. And he came upon this screaming, struggling infant and said to her, because it was a girl infant, live. You know, it's like God's, and we see this all throughout, like God's intention, his desire for his creation is to live. His desire for his creation is to be prosperous and abundant and fruitful and plentiful. His desire is not for things to wither away and die. Therefore, son of man, say to your countrymen, the righteousness of the righteous man will not save him when he disobeys, and the wickedness of the wicked man will not cause him to fall when he turns from it. The righteous man, if he sins, will not be allowed to live because of his former righteousness. If I tell the righteous man that he will surely live, but then he trusts in his righteousness, he becomes right in his own eyes, in other words, and he does evil, none of the righteous things he has done will be remembered. He will die for the evil he has done. So you can turn away from grace. You can fall out of a saved state. The New Testament, of course, will elaborate on this. But the point here is that, and it's not to say that you have to keep up a perfect attendance record. It's not like a school report card where missing a single question condemns you or something. It's, you know, I mean, in that sense, yes, breaking a single law condemns you to death. That is true. But God's system of grace and salvation has always been able to save people in their sins, even when they're sinning, as long as they are trying to follow God. The New Testament will elaborate on this much more significantly. This is, you have to remember, in the Old Testament, the New Testament itself, in Galatians, Paul will talk about this. We're talking here to spiritual children, okay? The Old Testament is the children's version of the gospel. And then Paul will talk about this when we get to the New Testament in Galatians. The New Testament is the adult version. And if I say to the wicked man, you will surely die, but he then turns away from his sin and does what is just and right, if he gets back what he took and pledged for a loan, remember you weren't supposed to take things from people and keep them. You weren't supposed to take a poor man's cloak overnight and keep it. Returns what he has stolen, follows the decrees that give life and does no evil, he will surely live. He will not die. Now, he will die eventually. No one from back then is still alive today because they kept the law. Okay? That's not how it works. None of the sins he has committed will be remembered against him. He has done what is just and right. He will surely live. Yet your countrymen say, the way of the Lord is not just, but it is their way that is not just. They had this complaint earlier when they were complaining about God condemning them for their father's sins. And God had to explain to them that that's not how it worked. If you're being condemned for your father's sins, it's because you're continuing to follow in your father's sins, which is very easy to do. And a lot of generations do that. Okay, that's very, very, very easy and very common for the sons to continue doing the same wicked things as the fathers. But that means you're being condemned for your sins, which happen to also be your father's sins. You haven't learned from your father's generation. Here, apparently, they're complaining about God forgiving those who have sinned and forgiving those who have sinned and not letting those who have been righteous go into sin, like, you know, punishing righteous people when they do sin, and forgiving sinners when they become righteous. So that seems to be what they're complaining about here. Your countrymen say the way of the Lord is not just, but it is their way that is not just. If a righteous man turns from his righteousness and does evil, he will die for it. And if a wicked man turns away from his wickedness and does what is just and right, he will live by doing so. Yet, O house of Israel, you say, the way of the Lord is not just, but I will judge each of you according to his own ways. So you're going to get out of life what you put in it. God has designed the world in such a way that we're going to get out of life what we put in it. By the measure we use will be measured back to us. So that's a sobering thought. Keep that in mind. By the standards you use, those standards are what you're going to be held to. So don't hold other people to standards that you don't want to be held to yourself. Because that will happen to you eventually. It might happen to you at the end of your life, or at the judgment day itself, after the end of your life, or it might happen to you in your life. Okay, there are plenty of times when we can encounter situations where we're going to be judged by standards that we had previously held to others, but never really wanted to hold ourselves to. That happens a lot. And we saw a lot of that during COVID. COVID is a great example of, COVID did a great job bringing a lot of that out to light.